Welcome to the Free Cities podcast. My name is Timothy Allen, and this is the official podcast of the Free Cities Foundation. Hello and greetings once again from the wonderful city of Prague. This is episode number 82 of the Free Cities podcast. Well, we're back here in Prague. We travelled back from Liberland via Serbia to join in with all the fun and games at BTC Prague, the biggest Bitcoin conference in Europe. For me, though, of course, less games and more work. Yes, I'm recording podcasts here, of course. To be honest, there's such a rich talent pool here currently in the city. I can't waste any time having fun, and I have to do as many interviews as possible. Over 12 lined up so far and many more to come. So watch out for those in the future. In the meantime, I've got a Liberland dispatch for you. Amongst other things, this is a conversation that I recorded with my colleague from the Free Cities Foundation, Hynek Fencl. Now, Hynek is head of research at the Free Cities Foundation, but also chief communications and research officer at Tipolis, which is, of course, Titus Gebel's company focused on actually building free cities throughout the world. Now, this conversation begins with us gathering our thoughts on the Liberland project after a few days exploring the area. And a lot had happened at that point, including me being taken away by the Croatian border police and instructed to leave the country, along with Liberland becoming completely flooded and the road in and out unpassable. So listen on for that and our opinions on where we see the future of the project going. If that's not too interesting for you, skip to about the 1 hour mark for the second half of this discussion, which centres around Hynek's work at Tipolis. There are some great insights here into the process of identifying suitable locations for free city projects and approaching governments, etc., and all the stuff that goes along with that. Anyway, I've got to be really brief today. There is no rest for the wicked, and I am currently between podcast recordings. No time to delay, so don't forget podcast@free-cities.org with your comments and suggestions. I always appreciate the feedback, and as always, in the meantime, you know what you've got to do. Sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Hynek Fencl. Actually, before we start, I'm going to set the scene because it's relatively important. And this is most definitely one of the most amenable locations that I've, as a butterfly goes past, most amenable places I think I've done one of these Free Cities podcasts, and that is, we're in Croatia. We are in a remote, I suppose you'd call this a cottage. It's like a one-up, one-down cottage on the veranda in an orchard, basically. A beautiful orchard, very well kept, lots of lovely trees here. And the reason we're in Croatia is because we are coming to Liberland, and Liberland is not actually too far from here. It's a drive of about 10 minutes and then about 2 hours on a bike.
2 hours? I think it's... Well, we went through the water yesterday and it was about an hour, right? And so without the water, I would say 30, 40 minutes maybe.
Yeah, I'm talking about when we actually did it.
Yeah, that was an hour. Well, it was longer when we went there because we didn't know what to do with the water and stuff. But when we cycled back, it took an hour.
Well, it was still an hour. I think
minutes.
it was still about an hour and a half, though.
Yeah.
All in all, to get from here, it's the drive to Liberbase. Mm-hmm. Then it's the bike ride to the edge of the water. Then it's 2 kilometres through waist-deep water. with our bikes, which was hilarious and really good fun. And then a sort of another 10-minute bike ride on the other end once you get into Liberland, and then you arrive at Jefferson Square.
Yeah, so we should make a couple of disclaimers, right? So the water is not there all the time. It's just that the Danube is flooded right now. So normally you can get there dry, but yeah, we weren't so lucky. We had this trip planned for some time, and we just couldn't cancel it or reschedule it because there was some extra water. So we're here, and we got to get through the water to get to Liberland, unfortunately.
I mean, I don't think that's an issue, because I think if you want to live on Liberland, you're going to have to deal with this problem anyway. Yep. Liberland does flood intermittently. I don't know whether the whole of it ever goes underwater, does it?
Well, so we went there yesterday for the first time. We were able to actually get to Liberland, and we only saw a small part of it, right? Jefferson Square and where the construction is going on. That's 1 kilometer or so after the border to Liberland. So if you continue down the forest path, there's lots of forest paths as well, but you will be able to just ride through the forests. And I don't know if there's any like hills, like that little hill where the building is standing on, but I don't know. I think, well, what Reed always says is that if the water gets as high as this, or higher, the whole of Liberland gets flooded. So based on what he says, this might be the only kind of rising bit of Liberland, and all of the other bits might be flat, but I'm not sure. I mean,
well, it would make sense because there's an old building there as well.
Yeah,
and someone would have known that from the past.
Yeah, but I don't know if there's more buildings on the site actually. I mean, when we go back there, we can ride around Liberland a little bit, explore the other parts if it's not all underwater by then. So
well, I think it will be, because it was rising the first day we went there. I actually got not arrested. I got arrested in inverted commas.
Apprehended.
I got apprehended by the police, and I was taken to the border police station, and I was instructed to leave the country. Fortunately for me, I have 7 days to leave the country, so it doesn't matter. So I'm staying here, and I can get everything I need to get done in 7 days.
And we were planning to stay for 6 days anyway.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
It doesn't affect us.
But that day when I was accosted, we were right at the edge of the water where we would have had to start sort of going through the water, and it was kind of like ankle deep at that point, wasn't it? Something like that. And
you could see a lot of the bits further down the road being above water as well, so it was just puddles, really.
Yes. But then we went. I mean, I told the police I was coming back. At the police station. They said to me, you've got to leave. You've been bad, and I won't go into the reasons why. But they got me on a technicality. But I said to them, I'm going back tomorrow morning, and their first response was, no, you can't. You'll be in big trouble and all this kind of stuff. But based on the conversations I'd had with them in the police station, which were very funny and amenable, we had very long conversations. I should probably recount it on a podcast at some point, because it was a really interesting experience. But basically,
you can write the script, and I can do the policewoman, and you can do yourself.
Yeah, there was one lady in there. What was her name? Daniela, that's right. And she spoke pretty good English, so she became the sort of go-between between me and all the rest of the policemen. But they started saying you can't go back, and then I said, well, why can't I go back? Because you've given me 7 days to leave Croatia. It's in Croatia, apparently. They're adamant that...
According to them, yeah.
Yeah, I'm adamant that Liberland is in Croatia. So what's stopping me going there? And when I said that, they kind of said, okay, you can go there, but it's going to be very dangerous. And I said, okay, I'm cool with that. I'm a big boy. I can sort of handle that. So by the end of it, they were like, yes, you can go there. You can go there. So we went back the next morning. I mean, I was going to go back anyway. And the water was a lot higher. Mm-hmm. The bit where we were stopped before was completely underwater. And then we had about 2 kilometers of deep water. And up to I mean, you managed to ride most of it, didn't you?
Yeah, it was about waist high. And so you were walking your bike, and the bike was floating because it's got air pockets or gas pockets inside the structure. But I tried to bike through it, and it was actually possible. It was just below the handlebars. So, yeah, I mean, you could ride it just about if the water rises about like 10 more centimeters, it won't be possible anymore. But yeah, it might have already risen. Right, last night there was a storm, so
I would say it almost
higher.
Certainly has. There was a huge. It wasn't just a storm last night. There was thunder cracking really close to us because the lightning was coming almost moments before the thunder, and I think it must be a metal roof here because it was 2:30 in the morning. It was absolutely like cracking loud, wasn't it? So I suspect that it is a lot higher today. We're taking the day off and doing work around here today, but we will be going back tomorrow. But we expect it might be trickier to get there tomorrow.
It might, yeah. We might not actually be able to get there at all. Or we could, they have some inflatable rafts at Liberbase. Liberbase is this house that they have. I don't know if they bought it or renting it, but it's this kind of house with a courtyard where they are basing their operations from. So that's where the people are meeting and kind of have supplies and bikes and everything. And from there, they go to Liberland. They go daily or often multiple times a day. They also haul some construction material. Unfortunately, they have to do that by bike right now because the only way really to get to Liberland is via a bike path. It's like a bike highway along the Danube. And then you go left of the highway, you take a left turn, and then you go this kind of forest road for a bunch of kilometers. But the only way to get to the forest road is through the bike path, and there's no motor vehicles permitted on the bike path, except for the police, of course. So you can't really get to Liberland in any other way than by bike or by boat in some cases. But I don't know. We haven't seen the beach. We haven't seen Liberty Island because it's all flooded now. So maybe you can get there by boat from Serbia or from Hungary. I don't know what the situation with the police is right now, but the only reliable way you can get there with the police's blessing is by on foot or by bike. And so they have cargo bikes, but they're not really capacitors. So you can, if you want to build something, they're building a house and they're building it with these huge like stone bricks.
Breeze blocks.
Yeah, breeze blocks. So they can only ever haul like 3 or 4 bricks in one go with the cargo bike. And yeah, as I said, it's probably about a 40-minute bike ride, 40-minute bike ride. And it's an e-bike, right? So it rides itself, but it's still a hassle to actually do it. So they have to do it over and over again just to bring a couple of bricks.
It doesn't do well in the water either, does it?
Yeah.
On the way yesterday, yeah. I think he might have buggered the whole bike up.
Maybe, but that was not the one, right? That just had a trailer where you can put light stuff, but then they also have the one which is kind of metal, so you can put heavy things like bricks on it. But he also said that they can't put more than 3 or 4 bricks on it because otherwise they get a flat because the road is quite rough. Yeah, so it has practical difficulties of getting there.
Yeah, right. So so far we've been here we're on the 3rd day. So far, and this is a fact-finding mission, us trying to find out what's going on here in Liberland. And most of what I've learned so far has been about the police, which was something I didn't really understand before or know about. But it is interesting, and it's certainly interesting to know. For example, the police turn up at Jefferson Square 3 times a day. And in fact, on one of the Telegram groups this morning, did you see that? They've got the camera set up above Jefferson Square. Someone posted the feed from there of the guys just coming in while they were all asleep and just looking around and then walking out.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
Right. So the first thing to note is the police have a pretty heavy presence there. Every time we went there, we were checked at least twice for our passports, or on the way in or on the way back.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So far, and the first time there, like I say, I was actually taken 20 kilometers, was it, to the police station? Yeah. It was like a long way away, a bit pain in the arse. And, and I mean, during that experience, I spoke a lot to the police and I asked them, why do you care so much? And they were like, they showed me this big map of the area and showing this belongs to us and this belongs to us, which I had heard something different, and we will go into this afterwards, how this whole thing works. But they were adamant it was theirs. But then when you dig a bit deeper, you realise they're not doing anything nefarious inside Liberland, as in, no, not nefarious, legitimate. So for example, on the border, before I got in there, they took me away to the police station. But inside Liberland, they're not doing anything. So on one hand, they're saying this belongs to us, but their actions actually in the real world are showing us that they don't actually own it. So.
But also, what they told you at the police station, that it belongs to them, is not actually the official position of Croatia or the Croatian state. The Croatian state says it doesn't belong to them because of this border situation. So I can explain this
go on.
a bit. This is the reason Liberland exists as a concept is that the border between Croatia and Serbia is on the Danube, and the Danube used to run in this kind of squiggly way through the countryside, and then they straightened it, or it was straightened by itself, I don't know, but it was probably straightened for shipping. And back then, when the border was set, it ran through the middle of the Danube, right, along those squiggly lines, and then when it was straightened, the question arose: does it run through the middle of the Danube, wherever the Danube is, or does it run in the middle of the Danube where the Danube was when the border was set? Mm-hmm. Right? Because it's not clear from the formulation of the treaty, whatever, right? And basically, both parties, Croatia and Serbia, are claiming that it means whatever is most beneficial for them. So Croatia is claiming that the border runs where it used to run, where Danube used to be at the time of signing the treaty. And then Serbia claims that the border runs through the middle of the Danube, wherever it is. And they're both claiming that because there's quite big pockets of land on the right side, on the eastern side of the Danube.
The Serbia side.
Well, quote-unquote Serbia side, right? Because that's what they're arguing over. And there's quite big pockets between where one version of the border is and the other version of the border is. And so Croatia claims that the border is so that they have the pockets. They have the big pockets. And then Serbia claims that the border is right down the Danube because that way they get the big pockets. But by implication, because it was a squiggly line and the pockets were not just on the one side but also on the other side, you have that situation where by implication the small pockets on the other side are unowned or unclaimed. Because if one country claims the big pockets on one side, they have to give up the claim to the small pockets on the other side. It's just counter pockets, right? And really, it's the ratio is like 95-5 or something, the land of the pockets. So no one cares about the 5% of the land if they can get the 95. And so both countries basically don't want the Liberland land, because if they did, they would have to give up lots more other land. So the Croatian state is not officially claiming that it owns Liberland because of this. So what they were telling you at the police station was, I don't know whether they were, miscommunicating intentionally or whether it was just some kind of...
We know probably they weren't miscommunication because they also lied on my statement, which we translated later. For example, the technicality they got me on was that because I'm a British resident, hence I'm outside of the EU, when they checked my passport at the border or in the border regions, there was no record of me declaring myself to the police, the local police in Croatia, which you're supposed to do.
Yeah, and normally the hotel does it for you. You don't have to do it yourself, right? So right. It's that you just register, you just give the hotel or the accommodation provider your passport, and then they do it themselves. You don't have to do it yourself.
Right, but I hadn't done it, and then so that was the technicality they got me on. However, we'd only just arrived. We'd literally arrived at about 9 p.m. the night before. And we can even prove that because we made a reel as we went over the border, didn't we?
It was less than 24 hours. So I don't know how long you have to register, but it can't be less than 24 hours. And we were there for less than 24 hours. So it's just...
Yeah, right. And on my statement, she said, when did you arrive? And I said 9 p.m. But on the statement, it says 5 p.m. Right.
Oh, it was just language issues, Tim.
I know, but the point is, I was writing this statement at about 6 p.m. in the evening, probably, wasn't I? So it's like, okay, maybe I'm now over the 24-hour, whatever. But also, when we translated the statement with Google, there's lots of funny things there, like saying I'm Well, can you remember them?
Yeah, so one thing was that they were saying that you can be kind of banished from the country, and you have 3 days to go, and then you kind of negotiated that up to 7 days, right? But then on the piece of paper they gave us, it included the legal articles within the laws that they were referring to, and it literally says that if you take people out of the country like this, you have to give them at least 7 days to do it. Or there's 7 to 30 days, I think, is the leeway. So they couldn't have given you 3 days. It would have been illegal under this law. So they were lying on that at least.
But what about the actual in the statement? There were lots of propaganda pieces, weren't there, about what Liberland's doing and how I just remember some of them were quite funny. And I you were mentioned a couple of times as someone I met on the internet, and I think you were also a Liberland activist. Yeah, right. Things like that, which obviously you're not a Liberland activist, and I did not say that about you.
No, but I wouldn't be too harsh on them. I mean, when they're making these statements, they have this kind of box of like, this is Liberland, these are the Liberland people, this is what they do, and they have a template where they just have everything written down. And so it's reasonable to kind of write, if we come to Liberland to visit for a fact-finding mission, it's saying we're Liberland activists, whatever. It's not.
They didn't
correct,
ask me anything about who I was, funnily enough.
No, I know.
They didn't once ask me anything. I mean, I didn't give any information other than what I was asked, of course. I mean, that's rule number one when you enter a situation like that. But there was no request to even where I was staying. Like, for example, they said, where are you staying? Are you staying at Liberbase? And I went, no. I'm staying in a cottage somewhere. And they said, where? And I said, I don't know. Because I didn't know you booked it. Mm-hmm. We'd only just arrived, and then it just moved straight on. It didn't bother. So it was all, I think, what was happening. Anyway, back to my original thing about the police and my experiences with the police is this whole thing is a little charade, isn't it? It's like a dance between activists or Liberlanders, let's say, and police. And the fact that, for example, they come and visit Jefferson Square 3 times a day is just a formula that they've been given that they need to do. Because, for example, we met one of the guys we met at Liberland yesterday, who we were doing some work with them, and he said, yeah, they come in, and for example, you're not allowed fires in Liberland, you're not allowed tents in Liberland, and there's fires and tents there, and they come in and they say, you're not allowed a fire. And he says, okay, and then they just go. So this is the interesting bit, because they're not enforcing anything there, which obviously is, for me at least, is signalling that they don't feel they have ownership over that, which is, as far as you're concerned, the actual state of affairs. Mm-hmm. So that side of it has been pretty positive for me. And bearing in mind, we've only been here sort of 3 days so far. But in that first amount of time, we've definitely picked up a lot of information, because it's all been hearsay for me up until this point.
With the enforcement, I think they have to be a bit careful, because if they did a lot of things, like if they enforced the Croatian law in Liberland, right? And if they did a lot of things, just to police everything and do everything right, then that would kind of signal to Serbia that they are kind of claiming it by implication. I don't exactly know what the international law is like in this particular thing, right? But Serbia could definitely take that as a signal or as some kind of indication that Croatia actually considers it theirs, and therefore they're giving up their claim on the land of the other side of the river. So I think they have to be careful because of this reason, and so they can't really do things beside visiting and saying hi and saying you can't do this.
But I mean, the other side of that coin is the local forestry guys that work in that forest, and they seem to be a law unto themselves. We were told that, and I believe this, because the guy, I won't mention anyone's names. I don't know whether they even want to be known, but. Mm-hmm. But one of the guys that we met in Liberland, who's been there since early May, said that I think it's about once a month, did he say?
About once a fortnight.
Once a fortnight, between 6 and 8 o'clock in the morning, the forestry guys come in and just basically pick up whatever isn't clamped down, things. And I said, what do you guys do at that point? And they just say, we video everything, which they are. They've got a closed circuit TV set up there. And they,
in the middle of the tree.
Yeah, but it works. Like I saw one this morning of the police coming in, because now we're on a Liberland Telegram group. You can see all the things that are happening. But so and at those times, obviously, the police are not intervening. Mm-hmm. Which is all part of the dance, and even us getting our passports checked. I noticed yesterday, because when you and me came out together and we were riding home down this kind of cycle path, and the police stopped us and just asked for our documents, checked them, and they were obviously just checking them off against their own records, and then let us go. So all they're doing, I think, is making sure they know who's in there and who's not, which it seems like a fair thing to be doing, just in case there's a problem. Mm-hmm. Because like today, it may well flood. There's one guy in there, and he's going to need to get out probably, or go. He'd probably survive up a tree for ages. He's that kind of a guy, isn't he? And he can climb a tree there and just stay on top for a few days.
He's got ropes.
Yeah, he has. I mean, he's a forestry guy. In fact, he's a Liberlander guy, but he's not. He works in forestry. So it's been a positive experience so far.
I wanted to say one thing with the forestry people coming in and stealing stuff. I think the difference to what I was talking about earlier with the police and them not doing too much is that the forestry guys are not official enforcement of the law, of Croatia. So if they do something, it's not representative of the state, or it's not the state agent doing that, right? So, and that makes a difference in terms of what Serbia can come up with. This means something, right? They can't really if it's just the forestry guys doing it. An equivalent of this is if you have a boat in international waters, right, out in the open sea, and you're not flying any flag, then what happens is anyone can come to your boat and board it, and basically do whatever they want to you. Because you're not protected by any kind of law outside of international law of the seas, and the equivalent situation applies here as well, right? So if it's no man's land, no one's claiming it, private people can just come in and do whatever they want on paper. Just there's exceptions. I'm simplifying it, but basically that's the case, and that includes forestry workers. And if they come and steal from someone, it's not really enforceable under Croatian law because it's not in Croatia officially, right? And it's not in Serbia either.
However,
so that's the reason why the forestry people can do it, because this is kind of like a lawless place, let's put it this way. But the police can't, because that would be indicative of them administering the territory.
But what about the fact, though, that it's definitely not a border there? Because they could have stopped. Well, for example, for me, I would have been leaving Croatia, and the police let me leave Croatia without. And I'm not an EU citizen, so
that's where the grey area comes in. That's where it gets interesting between the differing accounts of what the state officially says and what they told you at the police station, right? Because at some level they do administer the territory or kind of keep tabs on it. But on the other hand, they just are not officially claiming it. So it's kind of
there's also
very much a grey area.
There's also a distinction to draw between the border police and the local police, which was a new one for me. I thought I was just dealing with the police. I wasn't. I'm dealing with the border police, whose job it is to basically police the borders, and which they're doing. And I think they're probably allowed to go anywhere they want as long as it's near their border. Obviously, not deep into Serbia or anything like that, but I'm sure border police are kind of like involved in the border areas. And
yeah, but the Croatian border police can't go into Serbia. It would be a huge deal.
Sure, but they wouldn't. Yeah, but what does that mean? You mean on the other side of the Danube? Because Serbia are saying the border is down the middle of the river, right?
Yeah. Well, so the practice is that the Serbian authorities administer everything on the eastern side of the Danube, and the Croatian authorities administer everything that is on the western side of the Danube. And so this is kind of the agreement. And what we learned yesterday, actually, from one of the guys, was that there is apparently an explicit agreement between the respective police forces since 2015, the migrant crisis, that even though Liberland is not Croatia, Croatian police can come in and check it whether there's any illegal immigrants trying to get into Croatia via Liberland. Right? And so this was kind of the deal, and this deal apparently continues up until this day. And so that's why they have an easier time actually going there, even though they can't officially claim it that it's Croatian.
That seems to be exactly what they're doing there. Because as soon as we were in Liberland, our relationship with the police did change. They'd come up and check. When we were riding in yesterday, they just stopped me and said, "Where are you going? Are you going into the woods or are you going there?" I just said, "We're going ahead." Okay, go about your way. Whereas on the other side of the border, it's like, let me see your passport, let me see this, let me see that.
I have to correct you a little bit. We weren't in Liberland yet at that point, but
it was 100 meters away, was it?
Something like that. But we weren't across the border yet. But also, they knew that police car knew that we had already been stopped back there. So they were just like checking up on us, like, they were just saying, "Oh, hi, we're here, hello," but they were not actually trying to check us because they already knew who we were because the previous guys had checked us.
But we were told that those checks they do 3 times a day on Jefferson Square are purely something they've been told to do.
Yeah,
and they never seem to enforce anything there.
Yeah,
which does seem to be in agreement with the terms under which they're supposed to be there. So, yeah, it makes me think. It gives me quite a lot of. I think it's my overarching feeling is in the end it's going to work. Weirdly, well, actually, let me correct myself there. What I've realised is in these first 3 days is that what needs to happen for Liberland to go ahead is some concrete political agreement, basically. Something concrete. And if it doesn't happen, it's going to carry on the way it's going at the moment, which will be fine, but nothing's really going to happen. If someone, and I think this is what VIT is kind of doing on a day-to-day basis, but really, if there was something obvious and concrete and explicit, which I thought there kind of was, because, as you just said, the Croatian government are pretty much agreeing it's no man's land, and they're the only ones that are in it. The Serbians don't come there. So, yeah, I'm surprised that that something a bit stronger than that would literally open the floodgates there. And when you go there, you realise there is the potential for something to happen there. It's not a pipe dream. There really is the potential for something to happen there. It's a phenomenally interesting place. The environment is spectacular. It's like they call it the European Amazon, don't they? It really does. I mean, it feels like you're in the jungle.
Although it's misspelled on the signs.
Is it?
Yeah, it should have said Amazon, but it says Amazon.
Oh, right. But isn't that maybe that's the local way of saying it?
Well, it's written in English.
Oh, okay. Nevertheless, the Amazon, it very much, Amazon, maybe there's their take on it. It's a very interesting place. And like I say, the fact that it floods is not an issue. You can engineer that away without a problem. And I think it could be very interesting what might evolve there. The only thing I thought was that one of the big objections that the average person might have against Liberland, if it actually starts really, going faster, would be that you're destroying a beautiful environment. And I did bring that up with one of the guys, and it's kind of true in a way. You would be. It's a pretty pristine environment there. The counter argument appears to be that, and I'm not in or out favour of either of these. It just is. But the counter argument would be it's a very small area. The whole of that area, and I think just below Liberland, there's like something like 20 square kilometres of exactly the same land.
Yeah, much more than that actually. The guy was talking to us about this, and I then checked the map, and the protected area or the wetlands that are exactly like Liberland extend far beyond the Liberland border on the southern side, and they also widen here. So it's maybe 10 times as much. It's a huge area. So Liberland is a small part of it.
All right. Well, still, I think the argument still holds true. There will be lots of people who say leave that place alone.
Mm-hmm.
I get that argument, and I would still say Liberland should go ahead. But I do understand that argument, and I think that might be something that is something. It is something they might have to grapple with in the future. Nevertheless, if done right, it could be an exceptionally amazing place.
Mm-hmm.
What's your feeling about the whole thing?
I would very much like to see something happen there. I don't like to see some kind of pristine environment getting destroyed or anything like that. But there's no solutions. There's only trade-offs, right? So you can have something that is great at the cost of transforming something that is valuable, or a small part of something that is valuable as it is, into something else. And I think the trade-off here is that there's still a large area outside of Liberland that is exactly like this, several times bigger than Liberland, that is exactly like this, and that won't be affected by Liberland, even if it becomes a metropolis or something, right? So I think this is an acceptable deal, at least from my feelings, when I'm trying to balance between conservation of something that is nice, and on the other hand development and creating some kind of civilizational thing. So I would very much like to see something happen, and it definitely has the energy so that it could. And it's not only the people that are here or in Liberland or at Liberbase who are actually involved in this, right? It's this whole movement of people who are in the base in Serbia that's owned by Liberland, that are in Prague or anywhere around the world that are organizing events and kind of doing community building around this. So there's a lot of people that would be interested in actually contributing to building this and relocating there and making this their life mission. But for that to at least start in a meaningful way, you need two things, I would say, right now. You need a deal with the police so that they let motor vehicles come down the bike path, so that you can actually bring a truck and then put bricks on the back of the truck and bring machinery and things like this, so that you can actually build meaningfully. Because right now everyone's just building by hand, and it's just not viable. Like, it's not scalable. It's just it's symbolic. But it doesn't have to be if a deal like this was in place. There's already a road, it's just that you can't go through it because there's a sign that says you can't. But if there was some kind of a deal, that would be one step towards it. And then the other step would be, of course, to make a deal with the forestry service so they don't come every fortnight and steal everything. That is not chained down.
I don't think you'd even need that deal. I think numbers of people would constitute that. I think if your deal was with the police and you started building could take off there, I think more people would come. I think a lot of people probably don't come because it's hard to progress there. I mean, I should describe Jefferson Square, which basically has been leveled once, hasn't it? It was knocked down. Was that when?
Just to set the scene a little bit, Jefferson Square. If you're talking about the square, you think Old Town Square in Prague or something. This is like a small clearing in the forest where there's a couple of houses or house foundations of a couple of houses that once stood there, and they were knocked down earlier. But that's to do with you maybe exactly.
should explain what happened there.
So I don't know the full story, but what I do know is that the houses once stood there, at least that one biggest house, and since Liberlanders were using it for some things, in 2019, I think it was, the Croatian police just came in and destroyed the house. I don't know how they did it. It's a brick house. So
it was a bulldozer.
Yeah, they had to have come with something big, because you can't just destroy a house with your hands.
They mentioned that on the on that Liberland TV thing we watched yesterday.
Right.
She said a bulldozer. Mm. And also, when you look at the earth to the left of it, it's been pushed. You can see it. It's
right. Yeah,
like it looks like a bulldozer. Yeah.
So right now, what it looks like is that there are a foundations and some beginnings of walls of the house.
And cellars. The cellars are still there.
Yeah.
Which are lockable.
Which is important for the settlers.
Yes.
But there are some, beginnings of some other structures around, but it's a small kind of clearing area, and they're having 2 tents there, and just a space to work and to reside for a little bit. But that's the extent of it, of Jefferson Square. And then if you go down the forest, there's this hut that is being built in the forest, like a whatever it is, like a
wood, timber framed.
Yeah,
I mean, literally made out of the wood of the forest. The other thing about the former building in Jefferson Square is they are rebuilding it with breeze blocks, and it's about 4 breeze blocks high so far, the wall, because they're bringing them in 3 at a time. I mean, it's like I say, we both acknowledged this as soon as we got in, that this project is not going to evolve any much further in this way. It needs some concrete bureaucratic stuff done. Unfortunately, you can see that instantly. It's like, because when it does, the work that you're putting in will be worth 20 times the value overnight, won't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, right now what they're doing is basically Robinson Crusoe stuff. Right? They're just doing stuff with their hands and building everything and bringing everything in by hand, basically on a bike, which is the same thing. So you need a way to actually employ modern technology in building this stuff, which you can't do because of bureaucratic stuff, right? But it's really important, because if you don't have machinery and you don't have proper tools and you don't have proper ways of transporting things, you're just building huts in the forest, and it's going slow and it's not rewarding. It's just like, this is what it is. Well, it's just there's a reason why we use technology to do stuff, and it's exactly that.
But if you put yourself in the Croatian sort of state's shoes, it's not an easy thing to just say, go ahead and do whatever you want right next to our border. If you were the Croatian government, what would you do?
I think the Croatian government will have to do something sooner or later, because it's becoming a PR nightmare for them. I mean, it's not, I'm saying it in a bit of a dramatic way, but it really is. Last year, the reason why we're here in the first place is that last year the Liberlanders made a deal with the Croatian government, or police, I don't know exactly, but with Croatia. And the deal was, you can come in and you can, cross the border, and we'll, check your passports, but you can go there and come out and just visit if you want. And before that, they weren't able to do it. And my reading of the situation is that this deal happened in the first place because there was this YouTuber who made a video of trying to get to Liberland by boat, and this got viral. And he is on a boat and he's being chased by the police boat, and he has the flag in his hand, and he's trying to get to Liberty Island to plant the flag into the soil. And then he gets arrested, a little bit, not beaten up, but roughed up a little bit. And this went viral, right? And this, I don't know if it has like 8 million or 10 million views. And the Croatian population is like 4.5 million or 5 million or something like this. And so I can imagine that the Croatian government was like, well, you can't go on like this. We can't afford to lose face like this. And so I think this was the reason why they made the deal with them in the first place. And that's what happened last summer. And
prior to that, you couldn't go in, right?
You can, yeah. Well, they always tried, but they would always get arrested. And what happened then is that immediately a bunch of Liberlanders went in and started building stuff, and they started building like cottages and wooden houses, and not really anything durable because they knew it was risky, but substantial stuff. And of course, three weeks later, the Croatian police or the Forest Service, I don't know, probably the Forest Service, but with the approval and, oversight by the unofficial oversight by the police, they came in and then they destroyed all the houses, and they took everything, all the stuff that people had. And because this happened, people are now much more cautious about actually coming in and building stuff. But then again, the police or the Forestry Service, they haven't come in to destroy more stuff ever since. And, you have ongoing construction, you don't have finished houses or anything substantial, so they don't have much to destroy. But they haven't done this kind of big thing ever since, I think it was in September last year.
But
and
also, sorry to butt in, but also they're not stopping bricks getting in, and they're watching the wall go up every day.
I think the reason why they have not done it since is because when they came in and destroyed everything, it also created a huge PR backlash. So the Croatian government is stuck between a rock and a hard place. They don't know what to do, because whatever they do against the Liberlanders, it just creates bad press for them. And so I think this is going to go on for longer and longer, and it's going to look worse and worse for Croatia. So if I was in the shoes of the Croatian government, I would try to make some kind of a deal that at least saves me some kind of capacity to influence what can happen in Liberland before it's too late, before I look too bad to be able to afford to lose any negotiation position that I have.
But one of their problems might be that the reason they're in this position is because they're trying to claim the lion's share of the land that was sort of like, ostracized when the river changed its course. Now, if they lose that battle with Serbia, they're probably going to want to default back to owning Liberland, aren't they? Because if they lose the battle, the result will be that the land is designated down the middle of the current route of the river, which would mean they would get Liberland.
Yeah.
But at that point, if they've given it away, then they lose twice, don't they?
That is true, but this border dispute with Serbia is not an open issue, right? It's an ongoing dispute, but it's not open. They're not, to the best of my knowledge, they're not negotiating or they're not talking about it. It's just there. It's just open. It's just unfinished. But it's not progressing, and it's been like this for 30 years or so, ever since they became independent in the early 90s. So, yeah, I mean, the way I'm looking at it is this is just a stuck situation that won't get resolved. And you're right. We should say that if that border dispute ever gets resolved, one side gets Liberland by default. Right? So
unless it's been designated a country in the meantime.
No, but even then, it would have the dispute with the country that got it.
Right.
A new dispute. It's got, we owned it, and you had this kind of loophole that you tried to use, but it's actually our land. We just resolved the border dispute, so you see it's ours, right? So even then, unless Liberland is really a full-blown city with hundreds of thousands of people or something, then it's really hard to actually, do this kind of, we'll take you over stuff. But if it's just a village or something, then it's quite easy to say, well, this was always us. We just weren't clear on it with the other party.
Yes, but I suspect in hindsight, if you were to look back, you would see a precedent that the government was openly signalling that it wasn't theirs. And I think you could probably take that to an international court and prove it, couldn't you?
You could. You definitely could. It wouldn't be a clear-cut case. It's just that there would be a dispute, no question. But the way it would be resolved is, I don't know. That depends on lots of factors.
Yeah, me too. I don't know. What's your gut feeling then? My gut feeling, like I say, was I think this will go ahead. It could be long and drawn out, but I can see my feeling, you see, is that settlers have more reason to be there than Croatian sort of like enforcers do.
But then we should also mention what we learned yesterday, that some people who tried to settle and were really enthusiastic about it have gotten banned from Croatia for a number of years, sometimes 5 years.
Yours truly included. Well, I've been banned for 3 months. I'm not allowed to come back for 3 months, unfortunately.
But some people who really wanted to settle and were really enthusiastic about it, they got banned like this, and for a long period of time, and they banned them under some type of anti-terrorism law, so that saying they're kinds of terrorists, which is ridiculous, but that's of course what they can do if they want. But what that means is that a bunch of people who would really be into building stuff and really put a lot of effort and energy into it just can't do it easily, because they can't get to Croatia, which is the only way to get on land to Liberland.
So they could come from Serbia, though.
Well,
If they go straight to Liberland from Serbia, they're not committing any sort of crime because
they're not on paper, but the Croatian police they have boats and they patrol the river, and of course they can stop you if they think you're going to immigrate illegally into Croatia, and of course they have a bunch of excuses to have a reason to believe that you're going to do that. But also there is no good way to actually get stuff from Serbia to Liberland because there's no port or anything like that, right? So the only way you could get high volumes of things to Liberland would be to either build a port or to negotiate something where you can drive a truck down that bike path.
And is it true that Vit himself is banned from going there under those same rules? Because I think that he's not allowed to be in Croatia, right?
Yeah, I think he said that as well.
Actually, before you go on, can you just explain who Vit is? I keep saying Vit, but some people listening to this might not know who he is.
Yeah, okay, so Vít Jedlička is a Czech personality. He used to be a member of the European Parliament for the Czech Republic, and he became famous, at least in the Czech Republic, for establishing Liberland. In 2015, he noticed that this type of that there's this pocket that no one's claiming, and he went there, he planted a flag, and he said, now I'm proclaiming the Republic of Liberland, Free Republic of Liberland. And since then, he's been doing promo, he's been fundraising, he's been doing diplomatic missions, he's been trying to make it happen, as in make it a real country, so to speak. Of course, creating a country is a difficult thing. It's not something that you can just do overnight, and it's also not something that is straightforward. It's not just that you have to do a lot of work. It's often unclear what kind of work you have to do, because anyone can proclaim a country anywhere, and it's just doesn't mean anything. What means something is if you have other countries recognize you as a country, and if they have some kind of relations with you. And that's what he's been trying to focus on.
And in fact, I'll look in the show notes because I did an interview with Vit about 8 months ago all about Liberland. So there should be a lot of information there. One other thing I discovered via yourself actually on this trip was that the situation in Liberland is unique in the world, is it? You told me about one other place that's similar but not as hospitable.
Yeah. There are a couple of places in the world where you have this type of border situation, where you have the disputed border, and it's kind of the way the border dispute squiggles is where that creates bigger pockets and smaller pockets, and by implication, everyone wants the big stuff, so no one wants the small stuff, right? It doesn't happen too often, but it happens sometimes. And one notable example is between Egypt and Sudan in the middle of the Sahara. You have a place where a sizable pocket, you can clearly see it on the map if you zoomed out, like it's big. I don't know how big it is exactly, but it's there and no one's claiming it because everyone's claiming the opposite pocket. And this is just in the same situation as Liberland. The only difference is it's the middle of the desert, so no one wants to, no one has a reason to build anything there. It's inhospitable and it's just kind of a lost cause. So to the best of my knowledge, this is the only situation where you have a sizable chunk of land. This is 7 square kilometers, Liberland. And it is in a good location. It is hospitable. It's in the middle of a developed continent. That helps massively. That makes it really attractive for a project like this. And yeah, so all of these positive things about it is what makes it unique, even though you can find some places in the world where it's like this. But sometimes it's only, maybe 100 square meters, something, right? Just something tiny where you have a tiny pocket, but you can't even build a house there. But the only sizable one, to the best of my knowledge, is the one in between Egypt and Sudan.
Yeah, I mean, so it is unique in that sense. I'm positive, I'll be honest. I'm not necessarily short-term positive. I think short-term I think the cat and mouse game will continue for many years to come. But I think as long as the bureaucratic stuff, and also it's kind of like, I mean, if you see it as a battle between Liberland and Croatia, right, which is kind of what it is. Liberland are like they're like the guerrilla army, aren't they? You know, and it's very hard to defeat a guerrilla army, as you know. The decentralized army is like kind of, you know, it's going to pop up all over the place. It's kind of what it feels like. The question is, in the end, would Croatia just say, because when you look at it on paper, it's a tiny little bit of land that no one goes to, blah, blah, blah. It's, you know, it's maybe they just give up in the end and go, do you know what? However, when I think of that, I do think a government is going to go, hold on a minute, I don't really just want some random people that I don't know just starting a new country on my border. It could be anyone, and it could turn into like in a couple of years, in 5 years' time, there might a US Air Force base might appear there. How do they know if they designate? So it is a major risk for them to just let it go.
Croatia's in NATO, so a US Air Force base would be
whatever. A Russian one, then, like who knows?
I get your point, yeah, but I think what. Like, this is pure speculation, but what I think would happen at that point is that Croatia would concede that, oh yes, we really don't care about this, do your thing, we're not going to stand in your way too much. At that point, I think there would be some kind of an official deal saying, oh yeah, we're going to recognize you as a country, but we're going to sign this international treaty with you saying, you agree that you will be, bound by this agreement, and you don't have foreign jet fighters there and things like this, right? That happens with countries, they sign treaties like this. So this is something, this is a possible path it could take. But as I'm saying, pure speculation and probably very long,
future.
Very long-term future. I mean, might be, 20 years down the line or something. But at the same time, maybe what they need to do right now is to do something that's already worked once, which means invite some kind of big YouTuber and viral people and just tape them having issues with the police.
But I mean, issues with the police, I have to say, the issues I've had with the police have been legitimate in my case, and very amenable, lovely people. Yeah. Like I had a really fun time in the police station.
No, but what I mean, like not tape them, checking your passport. That, they can check your passport, yeah, sure. But for example, if you have a cargo boat and you're hauling things from Serbia's fine with it, to Liberland, across the Danube, and then the Croatian police stop you on the water, because you can't haul things there. Well, you can. There's nothing illegal about it if you're saying that's not Croatia, right? So those type of things, if they're bringing...
Are they saying it's not Croatia, though? Croatia are categorically saying it's not Croatia?
Officially, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And so in that position, the police are clearly in the wrong. They're doing something that they can't do on paper. So, yeah, it's just harassment in order to deter the Liberlanders from actually being able to build stuff. So in that case, yes, I mean, I would probably say that one of the good strategies would be to film them doing this, make it viral, make it fun, make it make them look bad just doing this, because what they're doing is illegal in that sense, and so just make fun of them, and that works most of the time. Well, just making fun of someone who's doing the wrong thing.
Like you say, it worked already.
Yep.
It got them a bureaucratic step up the last time they did it. Well, let's see. Okay, let's move on from Liberland. I want to talk a little bit about you and your Free Cities experience. Let me tell you what I think I know about you so far, and then you tell me fill in the gaps. You're Czech, from Prague. You went to Cambridge University, I found out recently. Well done for that. You read Titus's book about free private cities, the original one. Were quite turned on by it and managed to find an internship at Tipolis, which is Titus's company, which you can tell us more about. And now you've been there for a number of years and you're a pretty important part of the team. Is that the right?
Yeah, that's basically right. I mean, I did the internship for Tipolis in early 22, and then Tipolis was not actively hiring at that point. They didn't need to expand the team, so what happened is I got hired by the foundation instead, by the Free Cities Foundation. And I worked part-time for the foundation for a bit, and then at some point, half a year later, I got a job offer from Tipolis, which I had done the internship with. And so at that point, I joined Tipolis as a PR manager. I later became the Chief Communications and Research Officer, which is still my title now. And I've been working for Tipolis for just under 2 years.
And I know that there's most of what you do at Tipolis you're not allowed to talk about, obviously. But from working with you, what you appear to be involved in quite deeply is producing and helping write proposals to governments to hopefully, have them allow and work alongside Tipolis to create private cities, free cities, whatever you want to call it.
So Tipolis is a small company. It's more or less a startup still. And the way it goes in startups is that you have people wearing many hats at the same time. And that's the same for me. But what I regard as the most important part of my work is the research part, where I look into potential opportunities. I look at leads which might turn into something, and I try to figure out whether it's worth pursuing that or not. And at some point, if we find that some kind of opportunity is probably worth pursuing, then we want to get in touch with the government. We want to get in touch with influential people in the country who can, connect us with the government, for example. And then we're trying to find out what the priorities of that government is, what the problems in the country are, and why they would want to do something like free cities or autonomous cities in general. And this is something that can be quite obvious in some cases, but quite tricky in some others. And each country has some different things that they want to do to develop or achieve. And so you really have to tailor the proposals to that country so that it looks advantageous for them. The thing about free cities, free private cities, and what we have, just a small tangent, just to let the listeners know what I'm talking about. At Tipolis, what we're selling is International Cities by Tipolis, and that's an autonomous city model that's based on the free private city concept developed by Titus Gebel. So we're selling International Cities by Tipolis, and those international cities can have a lot of benefits for the host country, but those benefits can be very varied, and they can be accentuated in some cases based on the exact setup of the specific project, right? So we can tailor the model in a way that appeals to that country that we're talking to, and we can adjust it so that it satisfies their concerns, but it also targets the priorities that they have. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to figure out a way in something, the project setup that could be attractive for them, and then as a company, we're trying to go in and negotiate with the people in power to actually make something happen.
And I know, unfortunately, you can't talk about all the projects that are ongoing at the moment. Suffice to say, there are a number of projects running at the moment. Can you talk anything about previous projects that happened? Because I know one in particular that's an interesting case study. Are you allowed to talk about that?
A little bit. So in general, we would call something a project if it's already signed and a done deal and we're actually starting to build. So we don't have anything like that at the moment. What we have is opportunities at various stages. And in some cases, we have some kind of agreement or an expression of interest from the government. We like this. This is what we would like to do, and now let's talk about the details. In some other cases, we're earlier on, but we have a number of discussions with governments where it looks promising to some extent, but I can't really tell you, which governments those are and how it's going. It's just something that, unfortunately, you need to keep very much under wraps because that's the requirement of the governments, right? When governments are making deals like this, they don't like to make it in public, and they often make it a requirement for you to keep it confidential as well. So even in situations where we would want to be more open with something, it's just not possible often. So That's just the situation. What you mentioned is one of our past projects, which was in sub-Saharan Africa, and there's quite a lot of information about it out there already. I think Titus and others from the company have already discussed that semi-publicly in the past, and publicly as well. But we were in a situation where a government was interested, and we were quite far along. They prepared a law that would enable us to do what we agreed on, and then at last minute the law was not propagated. The law didn't become in effect. So,
and the reason for that?
The reason for that was that there was some backlash inside the country against some things that the president was doing at the time, including passing this law. But this law was just a part of a wider package of laws that were doing different things. So it might have had something to do with us. It might have not. I have my suspicions, but I'm not going to say that out loud. But the way it turned out is that we couldn't actually start building. We didn't get the signatures that we need to have all the protections and all the the legal setup that we needed. And so at that point, we tried to. There were elections, and then after the elections, there was a new prime minister, and we tried to negotiate with him as well, because that's what you do. We're not married to one government or another. It just depends on whether they are interested in doing business with us. But it turned out that the new government was not really interested in this type of project. So this was basically the end of it. That's what sometimes happens, but since then the company has evolved more towards not putting all its eggs in one basket, but into actually negotiating on multiple fronts with more governments at the same time, so that you have a reasonable chance that some projects will be successful, and some of course will not, which is expected.
This is obviously one of the main barriers to entry for these kind of projects is host governments, and we're seeing this play out in real time in Prospera and Morazan in Honduras, where one government has said, we love this idea, let's go for it, and then the government changes and the new government says, this is now invalid because we in the case of Honduras, they literally think the former government were illegitimate, so they've kind of used that one. But the point is, within the democratic system, you can find a very large swing of opinions between governments. So what do you think, what do you think is the best scenario in which to sort of like, the best scenario in a country where something like a free city, let's go with the Titus's version, the free private city, the international city. What's the best scenario according to you?
So what you always want to have with any project of this type is a win-win situation between you and the government. And that's what we're always trying to set up. We're trying to find something that works for us, but also that contributes to the development of the country in the way that the country wants. And they're getting a lot out of it in multiple ways, and they're getting, both money, development, jobs, investments, all those things. And if you set up the project right, you can actually achieve this, and this can be something very productive for all sides concerned. And also, obviously, then this is the important thing, that it works for us and it works for the government. But that also means then the city itself will work for the people who live there, right? As a result, because we can make it happen that way. But the first thing that you need to do is that win-win scenario between you and the government. And that is really the key to do this, because in some countries you can have governments that are really unreasonable, that are not interested in talking to you just by default, and then it becomes really toxic, like in Honduras. But in most countries, what you have is the opposition gets in power instead, and now they have different priorities. They want to make sure that they have everything under control, but they're not in principle opposed to what you're doing. And I think you're more likely to come across this scenario than the first one. And especially if you do it right, if you really genuinely are interested in developing the country and helping them achieve the goals that they have, they will, respect that, and they will see it as well, and they will try to deal with you in a respectful way. So I think that's the most important thing. And so the best case scenario you asked is that you start with talking to a government, you make a deal, you actually start building it, and then there is an election, the government changes, and maybe there's an opposition government. But the opposition government is fine with what you're doing as long as they have some kind of oversight, they can deal with you, you have regular communication with them on how it's going, what they need, what you need, and all of that. So as long as it's transparent with them, they are likely to be okay with it. And so that's the best case scenario in case the government changes. And of course, you can have a situation where the government doesn't change. There's elections and the same party stays in power, and then you just having the same kind of relationships that you had before the election. So those are the plausible scenarios. And then, of course, what happened in Honduras is kind of sad, but at the same time, it's kind of encouraging, in my opinion, because you have Prospera and Morazan that are still there, still growing. They're not growing nearly as much as they hoped because of this political situation, but they haven't been abolished. The law has been repealed, but that doesn't repeal the existing zones, so they're still there. And even though the government is very militant against them, let's put it that way, it doesn't seem to matter that much. And this is a hugely encouraging development, in my opinion. So what they managed to do in Honduras is that they set up the law and this whole special regime in a way where even if you have someone openly hostile to it, they can really have only some kind of limited impact, and they can't just abolish you wholesale. This is, very, very encouraging in my opinion.
It's true. There aren't many precedents in this, in the world of free cities, and we certainly need them. But do you have a personal opinion on where that's going, that whole situation? I mean, how deeply do you follow it?
I'm following quite closely, but of course I'm not a member of the Prospera team or the company, and the same with Morazan. So I just know what happens from the outside. But I think the way it's going to go is there's going to be another election. And before the election, nothing will change. It's going to go like this for the next, whatever it is, 1.5 years, I think. The next election is in, is it in the fall of 25, I think. So at that point, there's going to be an election. Right now, it looks like everyone hates the current government. Yeah, I'm overstating it a little bit, but that's what it looks like now. But if the opposition party gets into government, they might be open to actually negotiating with the ZAs in a productive way. So I think that's quite likely. But that's what's going to happen in 17, 18 months or so. So before that, nothing will change, I think.
To get it straight in my mind, did they repeal the ZA law? So that means the current ZAs are fine, but there can't be any new ones. So what would be required if you were in the future you wanted to create a new ZA?
The law would have to be passed again.
The whole thing would have to be passed again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which is that a Herculean task, or is that no? It's already written, so it's quite simple. It's more like
but it usually doesn't happen, right? If you look at laws in general, in countries in general, you don't often see laws being repealed in the first place. But out of the laws that get repealed, you don't often see laws being reinstated again. So that almost never happens. I would be surprised if that happened here. It, of course, could because, of this kind of political ping pong. But I'm not holding my breath. I think what's more likely is that the new government, if it's the opposition government, will make it easier for the two existing ZAs to actually develop and grow in a productive way, and it's not going to make hurdles for them to actually bring things in and out and develop and make the investment secure and everything. So if this is just done in some kind of way, then this is enough. And I think if you have 2 ZAs in a country, this is already quite a big thing. You don't necessarily need 50 to create something great.
What I also find interesting about the ZAs in Honduras is they're like Coke and Pepsi, aren't they? They're very different. They're the same thing, but they're very different. What Massimo's doing is very much like a completely different model to what the guys at Prosper are doing.
Are Coke and Pepsi that different?
I don't know. They are. Like for me,
now
right?
We're getting into the spicy stuff. It's going to be controversial.
You know what I'm saying, though. There's always 2 brands of everything major has 2 brands,
Mm-hmm.
and they're very different personalities. In the case of Coke and Pepsi, it may not be a good example, but the point I'm making is they're different. Coke, I see, is the traditional beverage of cocaine, whatever. Pepsi's the new kid on the block, always wants to be funky. Doesn't taste very nice compared to Coke, but it doesn't matter because we're like new and trendy and always changing. It's like the left and the right in one sense, isn't it? That Coke is a traditionalist and Pepsi's the YOLO brand, right? Not that Prosper and Morazan are that. They're different. They're completely different, but they have their differences along different lines.
I like where the discussion is going. The former Czech president, Václav Klaus, he was famous for... having the sense of humor where he was designating things as left-wing and right-wing that had nothing to do with politics. It's brilliant. So, for example, there's lists you can find out online, like what's left-wing and what's right-wing. So, for example, you've got skiing, which is
right-wing,
and you have snowboarding, this is left-wing.
Yeah, I can see that.
You've got...
No, well, it is. It's all like new and old, isn't it?
You've got pork schnitzel, and that's right-wing, and then you've got chicken schnitzel, and that's left-wing.
Yeah, it's anything that's... Oh, I don't know about that. Is pork the traditional schnitzel? I mean,
Depends.
Look, you draw certainly for me, I draw lines down. Left and right lines for me are based loosely on individuals and collectives and traditionalist maintainers and innovators. Mm. That's kind of like the main differences for me. There's probably a few more, I don't know.
Well, the most useful distinction between the left and the right, or between someone being left-wing and right-wing.
Whatever.
Let me start from a different point. I think left-wing and right-wing is mostly tribes, and it doesn't matter the content. It's just culture. It's not about politics mainly. That's just my opinion. Of course, you can see some patterns, but those are not that important in the grand scheme of things.
And they can change as well over time.
Exactly. And what I think it was Michael Malice who made the point or created this kind of meme where you can instantly tell whether someone is left wing or right wing just by asking them a simple question: are some people better than others? And the way you can tell is that a right-wing person says yes, and the left-wing people will give you a lecture because they will have cognitive dissonance.
Well, I'm a right-winger then, but I'm not a right-winger. I'm not anything. If I'm totally honest, I'm certainly. I don't even think in terms of any of those things. I don't feel solidarity amongst any particular party. I think I'm an individualist. I'm not a collectivist. But then again, sometimes I am. I enjoy culture, which is a collectivist thing. I enjoy large groups. I enjoy national pride, which is very collectivist. So I don't. I'm not sure. I'm also very traditional, but I love new and innovative things. So, how would you draw the line then? Not left or right. What are the 2 types of people you get? What are the Coke and Pepsi when you meet people?
I don't know, honestly. I don't often try to classify people.
Is that too brutal, saying two types of people then?
Yeah. I haven't thought about it recently that much. How I would. If I had to divide people into 2 parts, like how would I do it?
But do you know what I mean, though? A lot of things are binary, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, sex is binary.
Yeah. Well.
I only said that to piss some people off. But binary, but like when you study the world,
sex is binary, but gender isn't,
or whatever. I don't care. When you look at a lot of things in life, science, physics. Binary is an important element of life, obviously. And so, people, there's a binary aspect to people already. There's females and males, for example. So what about like the?
So what I would say is, in politics you've got lots of binaries, but they intersect in various ways, and you've got, of course, if you kind of do some statistical analysis on them, you find that some of them are related, right? So yes, you could find out, but I would say that you've got lots of groups of people that have their own, specific sides of specific binaries that are just a combination that is different from another group of people that are on the same side of a binary on specific stuff, but on the opposite side on others. So I don't know how I would do it wholesale.
Well, when you go to, I think it shows most when you start going to the extremes, I suppose. But then when you get to the very extreme, they're the same again, aren't they, on the whole?
I don't know. You can have very creative extremes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the current state of politics. I mean, look, when you look at the current state of politics, and I have to use America here because it's different.
We're all colonies.
Yeah, no, but you see, like the two obvious ends of the spectrum in America are right wingers and left wingers. Left wingers are woke, into like gender fluidity, into everything, or into nothing being really solid anymore, and then when you look at the right end of the scale, they're all into keeping the rule of law and blah 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 and all that, and they're personality types, really, aren't they, when it comes down to it?
I don't know. I mean, yes, you can. Well, the reason you're seeing this kind of divide is because you have to sort the society in some way if you want to mirror it to political parties and then you want to get someone elected. Then you get people sorted in some kind of boxes. But I don't think this is too useful, to be honest. I think most people generally don't care about politics that much. They can be beaten into caring about politics, but generally they're not. And then they have very varying degrees of beliefs on all kinds of stuff. And yeah, you can always analyze it in terms of, party politics, because you can always reduce it to a level where this is applicable, but I don't think it's too useful.
Do you know what was an interesting experience we had in Dubai recently when we were making that film, the SEC film, was speaking to someone, because there's no politics in the UAE. There's zero politics. There's nothing. It's run by a royal family,
Yep.
And what you discover is people live a completely different way. Conversations in the evening in a restaurant are completely different. But when people go home to visit their places, they become political again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
it's phenomenally interesting when you think about it.
The environment just forces them to do it, even though they're not interested in it, really, and they would rather not do it if they don't have to. And that kind of touches on the discussion that we had earlier that we can talk about a little bit, is that really this kind of model of states being something where you have to participate in everything, everything has to be collectively decided, otherwise it doesn't count, is just completely misguided in my opinion. And it's kind of weird to believe that this is the way it should be, because in all other parts of life, you've got service providers and product providers that just give you stuff and they compete amongst themselves, and you just pick whatever you want, and you don't get involved in the management of the companies of the stuff you're buying. For God's sake, like why even, like, why, if I'm deciding whether to buy Coke or Pepsi, I'm not interested in getting on the board of directors of Coca-Cola. Like what kind of silly idea is that, right? So I can understand why people associate some kind of collective identity with a country, and then of course it gets represented in their eyes by the state that rules over the country. Fine, I'm not such an artist not to understand that, but it's just, you can think about it in different ways that frees you of all of these associations that are unproductive and often end up being destructive for you and your family and the people living around you and whole countries, right? Because you can see that, right? If nationalism gets too pumped up, then what you have is just people wanting to be on the side of their country at any cost and in every issue. And what you then have is wars where people are willing to kill and die for some no-name politician, for some random reason, just because they associate that with something that they like and which they have a good reason to like. Maybe they like their city, maybe they like their country, the actual place that they live, the people, the culture. Yes, but what does the state have to do with it? Sometimes something, but sometimes not really anything. And this kind of automatic association with it is really destructive, in my opinion.
Do you think you have politics outside of democracy?
Well, politics is the way of dealing with public issues, and you can have
what about in an autocracy or in a monarchy, for example?
Well, you still have politics because you of course you can have different definitions, but I think a good definition of politics is issues that concern the public, right? But you can have different ways of dealing with that. You can have that under democracy, you can have that under some kind of autocracy, you can have that under a market system, right? In a free society, even if it's a democratic state, you have issues that are political that are not solved through politics or through democracy, right? If there's, if you have if you have the Coke and Pepsi again, right? And if Coke were to discontinue Diet Coke or something, that would be a public issue because lots of people drink Diet Coke, and it would be a topic, right? And it would be something that someone would need to decide if there's going to be Diet Coke or not. It's not going to be decided through parliament or anything, but it is a public issue. It is kind of politics, but it's getting dealt with in a different way. So it's just the definition that I use. Some people might use another one. So I don't care too much.
You're obviously an advocate for a system a free market system of governance.
Yep.
Right. So what's up with democracy then? Why is it so prevalent, and why is it so? Why are you not a fan of that system then?
So I wouldn't say I'm not a fan of democracy because. I'm not. If you just look at democracy right now and how it functions, how it doesn't, then what are the alternatives? Then yeah, of course. But I wouldn't say that I'm like a hater or anything, because I think it has its place, and it's had its place also historically. If you look at the historical development of politics, you went from something that was quite oppressive, and you had people in a situation where they felt like they couldn't contribute to the public debate and that they had no way of getting their voices heard. And then, of course, what that culminated in was the establishment of some systems where you had some mechanisms of getting people involved with the public issues in the country, right? And so that was the move towards democracy. And I can understand why people like it a lot, because now, even though it's not clear and it's difficult and it's it's not really open to everyone, strictly speaking, you need money to do it, you need fame to do it or something, there's still a path towards you becoming someone who can enact a lot of change in the country, and you can get involved in actually changing things if you don't like what's happening around you. And this kind of passive option is really important for people. It doesn't matter whether you use it or not. It just happens that it's there. I can understand that, and it's just, I feel the same way. But the issue with democracy that I'm seeing is that I don't feel represented by anyone in politics. I don't feel like I really have a way to change anything. I don't feel like if I go into politics, I will be in a position to actually do any or make any meaningful change towards the way that I would like to see the country run or develop or anything like that, right? So I think a lot of people have the same kind of frustration, is that what democracy had promised and what it might have offered at some point, it's no longer the case. And maybe, it's just a romanticization of history, of like, yeah, it was true at some point and now it isn't. Maybe it never was. I don't know. History gets blurry over time.
Well, it might have been not at these scales. Maybe.
Yeah, but then now you can clearly see which alternatives are better, right? You can clearly see that if you think of governance as a service and not as, some royalty ruling over some peasants, which is what our states are right now, even though they're democratic, they're still like that. You can think of better ways of actually managing any country or part of a country or public issues. It doesn't need to be, lots of people have this kind of weird idea, is that it's a binary. It's either democracy or some kind of totalitarianism or dictatorship, right? It's just stupid. I I don't want to make anyone angry, but this is just very much a first level analysis that comes from media perception, in my opinion, media kind of propaganda. Because of course, if you're in a democracy, the democracy will try to defend itself and present itself as the best. And of course, the best way to do it is to say, well, we are the only option against the only alternative, which is evil, right? And this is pure evil, and so you don't want pure evil, of course not. So you want us by default, and that's yes, if you frame it like that, that's obvious. But then you have to ask yourself, like, is this really all there is?
So what I picked up on there is the importance of having your voice heard. Are you saying in the democratic system currently voices are not really being heard?
Yes.
I get that. I feel the same. But in a system, say, of free private cities, your voice is your ability to either join the city or not.
No. Yes, that is true, but that's not the only thing, and that's not, in my opinion, the most important thing. Because what you can do in a free private city is you can always, the way that you're voting with your money and your feet and by like paying a certain city operator or not, that is reflected in what the operator does. So in the same way that your vote doesn't really count if you vote in a democratic system, then your money doesn't really count when you spend it or not spend it in a free private city system, right? But if you have more people that are in the same boat as you and are not happy with something and are expressing their opinion about that, then the operator of a free private city has much more of an incentive to actually change and to make you happy, in the same way that companies on the market do. They not only cater to the majority of their customers, they also cater to the niches. So because it's valuable to have the niches as well, because it's potential income that you could have for your company from the niche products. So this is, I think, what will happen with free private cities as well, and not just between or among different cities. I think it's going to happen within a city as well, is that if you're not happy with something, you can get your niche product or your niche solution, because the company can just accommodate you in a way that makes you happy because it wants to retain you as a customer. And that's a huge improvement.
Is that not also a factor of size? Like we were talking about Croatia earlier and how one YouTuber can seem to sort of push national policy. Just is that the case in free cities as well? Like a small city's got much more of an incentive to not piss off their residents.
Well, that works for democratic countries as well. I remember a couple of years ago I did this kind of high-level analysis. I was interested, so I just pulled GDP per capita, and then I pulled the population of a country plotted against each other, and there's a mild correlation. The GDP goes up when the population gets smaller, a little bit. I don't know if it's significant or not. I haven't checked, but it looks significant. Just sorry, this armchair analysis, But But you can see it in practice, right? In practice, if you go into smaller countries, the issues that are often discussed in politics are often the really the low-level issues that people are dealing with, the stuff that affects their lives that they want to get dealt with. And the larger country it is, the more abstract it is, the more arcane the issues are, and the more kind of high-level policy or international policy, right? You only have international politics really where the country is powerful enough to actually wage war in another country and make changes in another country. This is something that I discovered a lot when I actually moved into the UK from Czech Republic, because it's something that you never realize, but then I could see it almost immediately, is that people are thinking about foreign or international politics in a very different way in the UK than in the Czech Republic. In the UK, they are thinking it's, say you're presented with a country, I know Iraq or something, and you're and now the topic is, well, what is the country's situation right now, and how could it be made better? What the alternatives are? What can the UN do? Peacekeepers or something, right? Things like this. In the Czech Republic, this would not even be an issue on the table, because everyone kind of is feeling this is not our problem. Like, this is, our country can do nothing about this. This is just something that they have to deal with on their own, or someone else, can get involved in, but it's just not something that we can deal with. and therefore you have space to actually discuss local issues and local problems that the people might be having. And I think that this kind of imperial mentality, if I might call it that, is only something that automatically arises whenever a state is powerful enough to actually be able to affect that change. But if it's not, then people just stop thinking about it, in the same way that you mentioned about Dubai and how people get involved in politics and don't.
Do you think there's an optimum size then of I mean, the free private city model is along those lines, I would say. I don't know whether you've done any research on what the optimum size would be, have you, or something like that?
So I think there is probably an optimum size, but it's not universal. It's for some optimum size for context X, and then an optimum size for context Y. And then based on the geography, the kind of people that you have in the city, the surrounding governments, the international relations, whatever, all of this, you will have different kind of optimal points of how large the city should be to function the best. I don't think we can tell upfront too much. I think that will become more clear as the market process kind of develops. And when we're seeing lots of free private cities around the world trying different things, trying to be as productive as possible and as profitable as possible, you will have, that will become more clear. So it's a market process. In the same way that it's kind of the same question as if you asked me, what is the ideal price for a can of Coke? Well,
free.
Good point. But it depends on where you're selling it, who's buying it.
Sure. Yeah.
But also it depends on, but also you can't tell in advance. You will have to test it on the market to see what actually sells and what doesn't. So this is the same thing.
Yeah. Cokes on the plane cost €4 or €5, as I annoyingly found out on the way.
No, I was going to say that democracy is kind of a soft version of communism, and communism also works on a very small scale. It works in a family, for example. Sometimes, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But the bigger your unit at which you're practicing this is, the less it works. And that's true for both communism and democracy, but democracy is a soft version of communism, so you can see it less.
I think you need to elaborate on that a bit. We've talked about this before, and you were the first person I ever heard say this, but I kind of agree with you.
I'm definitely not the first person to say it, because that quote comes from Hans Hermann Hoppe.
Yeah. Go on then, break it down for me or for people listening.
The exact quote, and I hope I'm not going to mangle it, is democracy is a soft variant of communism, and rarely in the history of the world has it been taken for anything else. So that's the direct quote from his book.
All right.
And I agree with him.
How is that true?
So the most common definition of communism is public ownership of the means of production. And means of production can be almost anything. So basically public ownership of anything of any kind of value or any productive capacity, right? And if you have, what democracy means is that there are some things on which you can vote, on which you, it's not up to the owner of the thing what was going to happen, but it's up to a vote. And it doesn't mean, it's wholesale. It doesn't mean, now I vote on your house. No, it's what you can or cannot do with in your house, it's particular things. But you can imagine this whole kind of bundle of things that can get voted on. If it gets bigger, it kind of expands, it intrudes on your property, right? It intrudes on the things that you can do with you and your property. And if that is complete, if that is basically 100%, then we can call that communism, because then basically what happens is that the collective authority that is deciding on these things effectively owns everything, because it gets to decide on everything. And if you shrink that down a little bit, then you have some kind of a middle ground between public and private, where you can have your house, but you can't smoke weed in it, something like that, right? And so at that point, what you can smoke in it is the issue that gets decided by the public authority. So that's the kind of socialist kind of aspect of that ownership. And then you have the house that actually belongs to you. You can, for example, keep people out. And that's where private ownership comes in, right? And so the democracy is kind of middle of the way on the spectrum between private ownership and public ownership. And if you have full public ownership, that's communism in this simplified kind of definition. But then if you're in the middle of the way along the spectrum, you have kind of a soft variant of communism.
Okay, what that makes me think straight away is that both sides of that spectrum, the individual rights and the collective rights, have their place. Not that we should go to individual rights, but that there's some kind of middle ground that's the optimum, or not necessarily the optimum, but there is a middle ground to be had there. Because a lot of people would say, we just want to go full private rights or individual rights. And a lot of people would say, oh no, it should be the collective or whatever. Yeah. So what's your opinion on that? Is it a middle ground, or is it one better than the other?
So I think obviously it's some kind of middle ground that's desirable, because you have, that depends on your definitions of things. Because if you are really strict about the definition of private property, then all externalities get priced in, and like you can't produce externalities or negative externalities on people without buying the right from them first, or compensating them afterwards, right? So if you really have a strict definition of this, then the collective decisions get resolved in a different way, right? But the issue is transaction costs always. So this kind of system is pretty much unfeasible to do with what technology allows us, and what you would also be willing to do when you're negotiating with your neighbor on what you can do, what you can't do, right? And especially if people live closer together, it's just not viable to negotiate all externalities all the time with all people, right? So this is just not viable at scale. So what then happens is that you have some kind of a collective decision-making power that decides a one-size-fits-all solution for some number of people, and that's kind of the rule of the land. But we have two questions, right? One is, how big is the unit that has to abide by this one rule fits all solution, right? Because you can have a law that applies to everyone in the US, right? It's a federal law that the US government makes, and now it applies to what 330 million people. This is quite sizable. What justification do you have for that many people to live under the same kind of rule? Because almost certainly you will have a huge amount of people that it will not apply to and will not be happy with that, right? And you can also have you can have a city ordinance that is just for a small city of 10,000 people. And then you only have that rule that applies to those people that live in the city, because maybe that living in the city is what makes the rule warranted, right? And so that makes a lot more sense. So the size matters. It matters how you define who gets affected by that rule. But what also matters is the exact way in which you actually adjudicate that, like who makes the rules and what kind of justification they have for that. And my preferred option or solution for that is the free private city model. Is a good way to illustrate that, where you have clear ownership of and justified ownership of land, of property, of public spaces and everything. And then you can have certain parties adopting, more public-facing approaches to decision-making, or more, closed private ones. But you have kind of clear lines of ownership, and you can always transfer that ownership if it's not working out for you, or if something's going wrong, right? So this is not what happens in regular states. In regular states, you've got public spaces, for example, that are owned by the state or by the city or something. And these public spaces are just managed in some way, and then you can always petition the government or ask them or argue that they should do something different. But the government really has no reason to listen to you, because it's making money off of you regardless of whether they do their job well or not. And in a free private city, this is different, right? If you have some kind of suggestion on how to improve things, how to make things better, how to create a rule that more people are happy with, this is going to translate directly into how well the company that's operating the city is doing. So in that sense, you have much more of a say in what happens in the city and the policies that it actually ends up adopting. And yeah, I was talking about the public spaces. The company that owns the city and that operates the city can sell off parts of the city. It can sell plots for private houses that other people own, but it can also sell public spaces, right? So you can have a square or a street or a park or something that is owned by someone. You don't even need to know who. There can be a little sign on the street that says, "Oh, this is owned by here," in memory of whatever, and you can just have that company or that individual just taking care of that bit of public space, and they can do a better job than what the operating company of the city would, and that's why they sold it, because they felt like, oh, this is not what we're good at. We sell it to someone who is good at it. And this is not something completely foreign, right? This is something that you can see in a lot of ways now. You have lots of in big cities. You have if you have some kind of big development of like office blocks, with streets between them, it's often sold as this huge chunk of things, and then the company that actually owns the office blocks also maintains the spaces between the buildings, and they rent the spaces to cafes and restaurants and things like this that take care of the flowers that grow in between them and things like this, right? So, and they of course they keep up security, they keep it clean and so on. And so this is not something that I would be proposing like something completely new and unused. Like this is how the world works now. It just doesn't work that way too often, and the more it would work like this, the better the world would be overall.
So what is it then about this centralizing force that's giving rise to these giant states at the moment, and democracy presumably as the kind of, well, no, that's not necessary. It doesn't necessarily have to be democracy, does it? It's just the centralizing force. Like, do you get a centralizing force in free private cities where you get these mega cities, or do they get out-competed by the smaller ones?
I think you always have, in society, you always have both the centralizing force and the decentralizing force. And there's always kind of tug of war between them, and it depends on the specific circumstances of the place and the time, which prevails for a time, and then it might flip or decrease or increase or anything, right? So I think in some aspects of society you can see a centralizing force in whatever the Western world today, but in some other cases you don't. You can see a decentralization, right? You often talk about Bitcoin on the podcast, and even the Free Cities movement in itself is a decentralizing force against some other things that are happening in politics and in society. So I think it's always between the two forces, and it's kind of the negotiation of those two forces, how things will play out and what the overall situation will be. But not only that, one thing I wanted to say with this is that it also matters who you are and what you're sensitive to, because that determines what you're going to be seeing around you much more. So maybe you're the kind of person who just really focuses on monetary politics, right? And then you will be seeing this kind of centralizing force of the CBDCs or something, and the decentralizing force of crypto. But then maybe you're the kind of person that doesn't care about it at all. You maybe just care about traveling or something, and then you see the decentralizing force of flights getting cheaper, right, or something like that. And then so it really depends on who you are and what you're perceiving as significant or not significant, and that's what informs the outlook on the world that you have in terms of this.
I was just thinking about going back to collective versus individual, and then centralized versus decentralized. Are these the major forces in the social realm? The collective and the individual. And I mean, in a way, the collective is a centralizing force, is it? The individual will be. Those seem really prominent in a lot of what we talk about. The collective versus the individual, and the decentralized versus the centralized.
Well, this is kind of the rules of the game of the Free Cities movement of trying to focus on those things because those things are relevant for us. But many people are not interested in this at all, right? And if they're not, then this is not the only thing there is. Like these are not the main dividing lines. It's just because they're not focused on them and they're not interested in talking about them.
Are they though? Like, aren't they quite fundamental?
They are fundamental, but they're not the only ones, and they're just not important for someone who's not interested.
But I mean,
in them.
in the human social realm, like what underpins the majority of the decisions that we're making subconsciously? I don't know. I'm always trying to boil down these concepts into their sort of like essence to try and peek under the surface a little bit about the way we operate. And that's why collective and individual, it seems like a very deeply held human experience. Your decision whether to look to the collective or to look to yourself, it's a fundamental aspect of a human. Like, if I ask you a question, what do you think about this? I know you're going to think about your own experience and you're going to what you've read. But there are lots of people out there. When you ask them a question, they literally look at they look to the side to see what everyone else is thinking. You know, this is pretty fundamental when you think about it, because that's pervasive across all your decisions. You know,
I mean, I understand your motivation and the motivation in general to find patterns like this and go to the root of politics or society, like, and boil it down to specific things like this kind of dichotomy. But I don't know whether it's worth it, at least not for me. For me, the world is kind of messy and people are messy, and you've got loads of different factors that contribute to how they think about things and what they do, and I'm fine with it. I don't feel the reason to overly categorize them or to boil it down to anything. It just, you know, people have their experiences, people have their preferences, they're just going to live their lives, and I don't really feel the need to get involved too much.
It's not that I want to get involved in the same way that I didn't study physics because I wanted to get involved in deciding the laws of physics, you know. I just want to understand them. And I am a people person. I've been my whole life. I've been an observer of people and a documenter of people and a studier. I'm the worst armchair psychiatrist there is, but I don't care because, you know, I'm a beholden to myself. So I am trying to understand people. And when I see someone making a move or doing something, it's satisfying to peek under the surface, because you're basically learning about yourself. You're trying to find your own motivations and your own subconscious, impetus or whatever.
No, I can understand what you mean, and I also have fun with analyzing things like this. But I'm always careful with trying to make some kind of judgments about society or form my opinions of the whole society or all of politics based on these kinds of analyses, because I've had some experience with social science, right, and the way it works and the way it is, let's say, questionable, a lot of it. So I'm very cognizant of that, and I'm trying to, if I come to a conclusion about people or life for myself, then I'm careful about applying that to the whole world or the whole country or something, because I know that there might be some hint of truth in what I've discovered, but it's probably going to be limited to a particular time, to a particular place or particular circumstance that I'm not even seeing. Even if I think something's universal, it's probably not.
Well, what about human action, though? How do you interact with the ideas of human action, then?
Human action is an axiom, so you can't really, dissect it or say anything against it, because it's just what happens. It's just an observation of what happens, and then you deduce things from it. That's how it works. So, it's non-negotiable.
Can't you deduce from it an underlying, intention?
I don't know, maybe. Well, you can, like, from people acting, you can deduce the intention to achieve something with that act, and of course you can deduce a whole bunch of things. That's what the Austrian School of Economics is based on, right? Taking the axiom of human action and some other half axioms, and then just deducing things logically. And of course you can find out interesting things, but I don't think you can find out everything about society. You can find out a lot of things about economics, but you can't really find out things about psychology and people's motivation for stuff and how people are thinking about things and people's ideologies and things like this. I mean, yeah, that's, each field of study has its limitations, and praxeology has its limitations on this. But it's good for other things, of course. I mean, I'm a fan of the method.
So how do you interact with the world then, as you're going about your day?
What do you mean?
Well, what is your modus operandi when it comes to interacting with the world. When I was listening to you then, I'm thinking, there are all these unseen intuitions that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that they're not mystical. They're based on things that I could probably explain in certain situations.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And they are universal as well. There are these universal things. The human condition has a universal aspect to it, which is pretty deeply held within our genes, I think.
So, like, every human is a heuristics machine, right? We try to make sense of the world by seeing patterns everywhere. Some of these patterns are real, some of them are not. And when I'm relating or interacting with the outside world, I have some kind of approach to how things might be, how people might behave, and why that might be. But as I said, I also know that these thoughts that I have about how it works might not be true in all cases, and that I might be wrong. So there's a certain level of humility in how I think the world works.
But you still act accordingly, even though you might be wrong.
Yeah. I mean,
isn't that the process of? Isn't it error? This is error correction, isn't it?
You have to act in a way that you think is best, and you do that based on some preconceptions of how you think it's going to work and how you think it's going to pan out. But ultimately, you have to be conscious of the fact that it might not be that way, and that you might be wrong.
Yeah, I was listening to a discussion a while ago about people, I think they were probably Bitcoiners, if I'm honest, who were basically boiling it all down to a process of error correction in the same way. So as a human, you are constantly correcting for errors in the same way that the legal, the kind of legal system in the West sets new precedent happens, right, let's change the rules then, so as a human you're identifying all these things, and every time you realize you made a mistake, you're correcting it, but what you're doing is you're boiling down your perception to this kind of some form of essence, which means you can kind of interpret things better.
But I mean, things are always changing as well on the outside. If you just had a static world and you were just interacting with it and you were learning more and more things about it, then yes, you could probably be quite confident about what you learn, and that this is how it works and this is reproducible and all of that. But the world keeps changing every second. So this is just like the market process. You can't just arrive at a conclusion and think that this is the ultimate solution and just go with it. This is a constant thing that is changing over time. That's how the market works, and that's also how people work, because people constitute the market.
Yeah, but what about things like the laws of physics? You're going to say that they're changing as well, aren't you? Because they probably are. Like,
they're not changing, but our perception of them is changing. The way that scientists discover that, like, there is some kind of law of physics, then they discover that it's actually it needs to be formulated different, because this formulation that we thought was universal breaks down at certain edge cases, right? And the famous example of Newtonian physics and Einsteinian physics, right? So this is just what happens all the time, where you think something's universal, but then you find out it's only applicable in particular cases.
So. We're going to the notion of God here. I think.
But that doesn't mean what I wanted to finish this part off with is that that doesn't mean the laws of physics are changing. Is that just what we know about the laws of physics is changing, and our formulation of trying to reconstruct how it works and put it into words is changing, right? So that's what changes.
But I still think what I said earlier still holds true here. It's a process of, it's like a revealing what's actually there. And so there is an essence then. There is this essence that is there.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about the difference. You were talking about society, about people, right?
Yeah, but I think...
And then you changed it to laws of physics. And you've got some things in the world that change and some things that don't change, right? Laws of physics don't change as far as we know. But then you have people who decide, who are, actors in the world. and they have different motivations. They do different things, and they affect different things. There's the butterfly effect, of course, that means everything can change for seemingly no reason, right? And so if you talk about society, then you're dealing with people where everything changes all the time. But that's very different than if you're talking about laws of physics.
Well, no, I personally don't. I consider them take physics, for example. Human, social and physical arises out of the laws of physics. So, for example, you have a physical law which states that something like like energy tries to be as efficient as possible. And as a result, when you look at trees and leaves, you look, it kind of works there. I see what you mean. The reason why the veins are in this leaf is because that's the quickest way for to create a path to the edge of the leaf to take water or whatever. And so humans follow these same rules, and therefore human culture also arises out of this thing, because we're all trying to optimize. We're all beholden to this kind of essence, right? This source of it all, which is where this place where everything arises. Maybe, but I don't know. I don't even know where we are now. We're in the middle of nowhere. We're in an intellectual wasteland here.
I think you think I'm arguing against predictability in the world and against making generalizations, but I'm not. I think that's useful, but you always have to be conscious that you might be wrong in this particular situation.
Yeah. No, I am mostly wrong in over time. If I look back at everything I used to know, like I say, it's error correction, and this is like I've been on my Free Cities journey has been one of error correction, and I'm not. For example, I'm not someone who's going to live in a city, for example, but I still advocate for this idea because I really think that there are fair ways to do things. And there are unfair ways to do things, but it's still error correction. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll realise that I'm destined to. If I can have I think maybe it was you who were talking about this the other day, where I already live in a free city. I live on a farm down in the middle of nowhere with my own land. Like when I walk through my boundary, there's no one telling me what to do there. In fact, we live in a socialist utopia, probably, amongst my family.
This is actually an interesting topic, that huge parts of the world are not under direct government control because the government is just not strong enough, doesn't have the state capacity to enforce their laws and do all these things that we take for granted in the Western world. And you have this kind of situation where lots of people do live in the kind of world that we're describing when we talk about free cities and things like this. But the difference is that it's, everything is unofficial. You don't have official institutions. You just have the de facto setup. And then, of course, you can have some kind of policemen come in every month and they can do whatever they want because they have the legal power to do it, right? But what we're trying to do in this movement is to create free cities that are official, that are kind of transparent like this, where it works like this openly, and therefore it's scalable, and you can actually create economies, you can create predictability, you can create stability, you can create something that lasts because it's official, because of its status of embeddedness within the legal system of the world. And that's the major difference, right? So we're not trying to create something new, we're trying to just standardize something that's already practiced everywhere around the world.
I think that's a phenomenal statement you've just made there, and this is exactly what we're seeing here in Liberland. Funnily enough, to bring it all back round to where we started, we were in Liberland yesterday, and for all intents and purposes, we were free men. We were chopping trees down, we were building things, we were having the time of our lives, but you're living on a knife edge then, because at any moment someone could come in and claim a higher authority over you, even though that when they're not there, that's pure projected authority. Mm-hmm. And if you're not thinking about it, it doesn't exist. But you're absolutely right that the Free Cities movement is about adding solidity to these longevity to these kind of systems. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's about turning things that are unofficial into official arrangements so that they can grow and they can be stable and predictable and reliable.
I think that's a brilliant place to end, if I'm perfectly honest. we've got a day off to have, mate. Let's do it. We're going to have a barbecue, I think. Anyway, great talking to you, Hynek. You know, we've already done 100 hours of talking on this trip alone, and there are so many things we covered normally but that we haven't covered today. But you know, we've done at least 2 hours. Yeah, we're over 2 hours. We should knock it on the head.
All right.
But yeah, thanks for speaking, and let's do it again in a year and see if I've corrected any errors and you've come up to any new understandings.
Right. Yeah, let's do it. Thanks for the invite, and it's been a pleasure talking to you too.
Cheers.